Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
And this is the second episode of our third season as we are officially part of the Spreaker Bloom program. So thank you, Spreaker. And today we're going to be talking about Beauty and the Beast.
And before we get too deep into that, let's take a second and remind you all that we have a YouTube, we have a Facebook, we have a Twitter, and the reviews that you guys give us on any of those sites, in addition to the podcasting sites, really go a long way in helping us get to other listeners. So thank you guys for taking a second to do that. And we also want to make sure we mention that the opinions stated in this podcast only reflect our opinions and don't have any representation from any outside entity or employers. This is purely for entertainment purposes, and it's just our opinions.
Mm-hmm. And we also want to give one more disclaimer that we are, due to COVID-19, as many people are right now, we're recording remotely. We're all in our own homes, staring at each other via computer. So if there are some differences in sound quality, if we sound a little more far away, or if you hear, hopefully not, the distant sound of a car horn, because I live on a pretty busy street, that's why. And so we just ask for a little bit of forgiveness in this time when we're all trying to do our normal stuff within a very abnormal context. And so speaking of people that are locked up in their homes, that's why we picked Beauty and the Beast today. It's about a bunch of people that are stuck inside of, well, a castle, which I feel like would have a very different energy than, say, an apartment, which is what I'm in right now. And so we will be talking about the 90s animated version of Beauty and the Beast, not the live one that came out a few years ago, even though we all love the live version. And we're going to be talking about depression in men as seen by the Beast, personality disorders as seen via Gaston. And then we're also going to briefly touch upon Stockholm Syndrome about Belle and the Beast, basically Stockholm Syndrome, yay or nay. And so just very briefly, in case for some reason, you have no idea what Beauty and the Beast is about, I don't know how that could be in modern times. Basically what it is a young girl who doesn't love the small town she lives in. Her father goes to a fair. He gets lost on the way to the fair, gets taken in by a beastly prince who was turned to a beast because he's a douche. And she comes to find him. He says, I'll let your dad go if you take the place. So then she ends up living with this beast. And over the course of, 3 days to 2 months, I can't tell the time frame of this movie, she falls in love with the beast, which is how he can break the curse to become a man again. Meanwhile, her father's gone back to her small town. He's kind of riled up all the townspeople, saying my daughter's been kidnapped, and they go to the castle to fight him. Gaston is there as well. That's not maybe the best synopsis I've ever given, but I think it's brief. I'm trying to keep it brief and sexy.
I enjoyed it.
So starting with, we'll go right into it. So the Beast, like I said, was a young, mean jerk who was very cruel to an old woman who ended up being a magical person, fairy, witch,
enchantress.
Dope. And because he was mean, she cursed him to be
Did you just say dope?
like a wildebeest character sort of thing. It's like an amalgamation of a lot of different wild animals. And so now he's stuck in a castle by himself, looking bad, looking like a beast. And he's surrounded by his servants who are now inanimate objects come to life. And so when we think about depression in the Beast, why are we thinking depression? And how does that correlate depression that we see in men?
So before we get too deep into that, I'm going to list out kind of the criteria for major depressive disorder, because I feel like depression is one of those disorders that everybody thinks they understand but doesn't understand all of the symptoms that can be manifested in depression, because we all go like, oh, someone's sad, they're depressed. But there are other symptoms to it that go into depression. So I'm going to kind of talk about some of those real quick. So in order to be diagnosed with major depressive disorder, you have to have 5 of any of these. So difficulty sleeping, so be it insomnia or difficulty getting to sleep, staying asleep, or difficulty waking up too early or no sleep at all, or sleeping too much, changes in appetite, changes in weight. So if you suddenly are eating more or eating less, if you gain 5% of your body weight or more in a short period of time, that can be a symptom, or lose it. Poor concentration, fatigue, psychomotor agitation, meaning you get really jittery, you can't sit still, can't feel calm, restless legs, that kind of thing, or psychomotor retardation, meaning you start moving visibly slower. Like when you see someone doing the slow walk, if they'd put it in A Knight's Tale, trudging, to trudge. That is an important thing. And then also having someone with a depressed mood, loss of pleasure and enjoyment, which is formerly known as anhedonia, but I don't see that term used very much. Feelings of worthlessness or guilt, thoughts of suicide or death, and hopelessness. So you have to have 5 of any of those.
Okay. And so we see a few of those, obviously, in the Beast right away. Just thinking about what you shared, hopelessness about a situation getting better. I think it's a little color the circumstances. Like there's a hopelessness around that anyone will ever love him, but that they'll also break the curse. And there is a time frame on that. So it seems like his hopelessness is kind of tied into that as well.
Well, and they've been in that castle for 10 years.
Has it been 10 years?
10 years.
They say 10 years at some point. He's 10 years we've been resting when they sing Be Our Guest.
Oh. Doing nothing more than dusting. Okay, so, and then we're also seeing like the worthlessness. Like he doesn't like to, well, does he like to look at himself? He definitely doesn't take care of himself. Like, you know, the big scene where they make him over, it's because he's definitely like lost. He's not even trying to be like a man anymore. You know, like the way he eats his oatmeal, the way that he like just kind of wears like shredded versions of his previous clothes, you know, and like how he reacts to being bathed and stuff. I don't know. For me, it makes me like speculate, like, does he really like take care of himself at all physically? Which is, you know, a symptom of like depression is like, and well, this is a symptom of like the worthlessness part of it, or the lack of self-worth, is you like let yourself go, and that like why take care of someone that you despise, which is yourself. And
the loss of energy.
Oh yeah, and so yeah, it takes too much to try to like take care of yourself.
Yeah, sure. So it's that combination. I think we see in him that like he's hopeless that it will matter. He doesn't. I don't know. He doesn't seem to have an energy problem. But like even finding the emotional energy, because when he's not angry, he seems to be pretty docile and mopey.
And he's very moody. Well, he's very quick to react, very quick to snap on people, and you can see him note that within himself. Like in the beginning, he like has to stop himself a few times to be like, "I'm sorry," or yelling. But then he'll be like, "I'm not sorry for yelling." And so he definitely goes from like 0 to 60, as they say, very quick, which can be a sign of depression.
Yeah, I think that's okay. I think the irritability part for him is, I think that's definitely one way that his symptoms are coming out. I think he's just so, and also that it makes sense too, because I think a part of this is also losing that identity part, right? Of like, he's not a man anymore, and is he a beast? And kind of like what you said, Brittany, which is just kind of leaning in to the beast part, but really kind of the idea that he's an animal. And I think and just not taking good care of himself. So I think that's absolutely true.
And I think like a good, which is why I'm glad you wanted to talk about this, Ben, is, and obviously as a man, I will, you know, you can speak more to this, is that the irritability piece with him, like how angry he is. And I think one thing I hear a lot when I talk to people, even in like my personal life about depression, they'll be like, well, that person's not acting depressed. Like, how can they be depressed? They're not sad. They're not. I think there's this idea that when you're depressed, you're sleeping all day. You're just like crying all the time. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Sadness and Inside Out, like that character of Sadness. Like there's this idea that that's how depression looks. And if you don't have that, or you don't look like that, then you're not really depressed. And so like sometimes family members won't believe you, or people in your life won't believe you because you don't quote unquote like look depressed. And so I think, like I said, why I'm glad we're talking about this is anger can be a way that depression actually is exhibited and for a lot of people. And so the irritability piece, I feel like is really important when diagnosing depression and recognizing that part.
And it's especially important in men because men are not allowed to be sad. Sadness is not an emotion men get to have societally. Not that we don't have it, but it's not one that's acceptable. Men, when we're angry, people take care of your anger or respond to it. But when men are sad, that's not a thing that is responded to positively.
Yeah, I mean, like anger in general, like as a society, not so much with women because there's a whole thing with that, but like there is more respect around being angry than there is about being sad. And when I talk about it in therapy, it's because, you know, anger feels like it's an action feeling. Like you feel like you're going to do something, like you're going to handle something, you're going to kick somebody's ass, you're going to do something about this problem. If nothing else, you're going to intimidate other people. And so I think there is a incorrect feeling of control with anger. And then sadness is a lot more passive of a feeling. And so to be sad just feels submissive and feels like you're giving up control.
And it feels like that double for men because of the way that men respond to other men and the way that we're supposed to maintain ourselves. Like sadness isn't something that we often allow ourselves, and people will berate themselves. Men in particular will berate themselves far worse than anyone else perceives it because of the stigma on men being sad and what that means. And what terms are going to start coming out is they're going to be calling themselves a little bitch, stop being a puss, all kinds of things like that, all ways to emasculate themselves and equate being sad with not being a man anymore, not being a masculine man. And this is a big problem because sadness and depression are real feelings. They exist outside of whether it's a disorder or not. Sadness is an emotion, and we all experience it at various times, and we need to express it and to do so in a safe and productive manner. And when that gets taken away from us, from men in particular, that avenue gets gone and it gets taken away, so that men end up not only not having an outlet for it that's feels accessible, but they then turn to the one that does feel accessible and gets their needs met and get recognized, which is anger. And we see that in The Beast early on. We see him after Belle leaves, when Gaston shoots him, that he is sunk into full depression, like just let it come. Let them come. He let Gaston shoot him.
And that's more of like the apathy that you'll sometimes see with depression of just like, who cares? What does it matter? I'll let anything happen to me, like not having the will to fight, sort of, which is kind of the other, like can be the other end of the spectrum with how depression presents.
Right. It's the hopelessness. What we see with Beast, with the anger in the beginning of the movie, is that he is so touchy. He is so reactive, and he is on such a hair trigger because he's operating like, I'm sure anxiety factors into his too, because he's terrified that, he knows time is running out. So anxiety is obviously an emotion he feels throughout this film. But the depression, I think, takes precedence because he's feeling that sadness and hopelessness. And for him, it comes out. We see the psychomotor agitation in him. He's pacing around. He's jittery. He's doesn't look calm ever. He can't sit still. He's shaking his head back and forth. And we see the anger and irritability come out anytime that he is forced to feel anything.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the entire existence of Belle in the castle just like stirs up all this stuff, all the pacing, the anger, but it's clear that it was happening even before that, because in the whole West Wing of the house, like slashing the portrait of himself,
right.
All the carnage and damage in that area of the house is clearly like depression, anger and within depression presenting itself. Like he looks like he's clearly gone on a rampage or two within his own home, probably when he is having a big swing of depression or a big swing of actual sadness, and then having it come out in rage.
And I think that one of the things that we see, one of the things that just made me think of how sometimes unaware people are of the symptoms of depression is that we do see him kind of like, he still smiles sometimes and he still like seems kind of okay. And so also just knowing that there's a part of that, just because someone has a diagnosis of depression, it doesn't mean that they're going to be sad all the time. Doesn't mean they're going to be seen that way all the time, but that some days are just harder than others. And I think realizing that it doesn't mean that something bad had to happen. Sometimes some days are just harder than others. I don't know that they really show that in this, but I think just wanting to point that out in terms of what it can really look like, and why sometimes even for people who have depression, that is one of the things that I feel like society doesn't really understand, that having depression doesn't mean that you're sobbing all the time. It means all different kinds of things, and everybody and people present it in different ways. And I think certainly men, especially in my experience of working with men, certainly it comes out in anger also, because like we've talked about in the past, the only emotion men are allowed to have really is anger.
Been happy.
Maybe. I don't know if men are allowed to be happy either. Truly, I don't know.
Happiness.
Men are allowed to be happy. We're allowed to be happy. Happy, hungry, angry.
Tired.
No, not really.
Toyotathon.
And Toyotathon. What?
That's the other thing, about to be excited about sales of trucks. Those are like your 5 emotions.
Oh. Toyota isn't the first thing I would think of when I think of trucks, but okay, I'm with you.
Whatever.
But the things that we see with Beast that also echo to this is like, we don't see anything about his sleep patterns.
Well, I'm sure he doesn't really even, who knows what his sleep's like? Because also, if you've been isolated, I think this is what a lot of people are experiencing right now in quarantine or lockdown, is that your sleep gets, when you're only in one place, like your sleep can easily get out of whack if you don't have a centered routine. And so he was someone, if he was a prince, he probably didn't have maybe had a lot of royal obligations, but he probably didn't have like a work schedule like people typically would, like maybe the villagers did. So he might already be someone who has a little bit of an odd routine. But then now that if you're locked up, like he really doesn't have to abide by anything. So it wouldn't be surprising if his sleep's all over the place. Like I think a lot of people are finding that their sleep's all over the place right now if they're not currently working because of the pandemic.
I think even those of us that are working are finding our sleep getting out of whack. And I don't know about you two, but one of the things I'm hearing from people in lockdown right now is that a lot of people are starting to report having more vivid dreams, that they are remembering more.
Interesting. I'm kind of having more vivid dreams.
I am too.
Wow. Are we all trying to process our feelings through our dreams?
Well, I mean, that's what we do. And we're also in a state right now, like they are in this castle where it's a collective trauma.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Like the castle is a microcosm, really, because, they know that people outside of the castle aren't in the same situation they are, whereas we have constant bad news coming all the time, and there's the constant fear that's propelling this trauma. And we're seeing the same thing in the characters of this castle, because they only interact with each other, and they're all only concerned with the same thing, which is becoming human again and helping the master find love so that they can all become human again. So they all have secondary gain from that.
For sure. And then it starts this like, well, also when you're the other characters don't seem outwardly depressed, though you can feel a lot of anxiety coming off of them. But I would imagine in this, and I wonder, well, because we're also seeing them once visitors have finally come to the castle, right? Belle's dad and then Belle. And so I wonder in the time right before that, how depressed they all were, because it's also feeling when you're all together like that and there's no change, like just for lack of better terms, like the vibe in that castle. I mean, it's easy to feed off of each other when also when your leader, if you're going to call the beast the leader of them, your patriarch or whatever, is like so depressed and so angry and so unpredictable. Like they're kind of like kids who live in, or family members who live in a household like that, where everyone's on edge, everyone's kind of feeding off of that energy. And you can see that too with them, not to get too off track or off topic, but like they're very anxious, like Cogsworth especially. He's like, don't be too loud, we don't want master hearing, we're going to get in so much trouble. Kind of in the similar way that family members in a home might react when they have a patriarch, father, whatever in the home who is not managing, a mental health diagnosis like depression, who's very edgy, who they don't trust to handle it. So they have to try to handle the circumstances around them because the person's not handling the way they're feeling.
Yeah, and that's definitely what we see going on in the castle.
Mm-hmm.
Is they are taking things into their own hands. And I think Lemire is another good example of what you're talking about, plus what depression can look like in men, where he's trying to do all he can to take control of the situation, but problem solve. But we do see glimpses behind the veil that he's deeply sad too.
Yeah. They're all working so hard to try to get out of this situation, which you're right is very like the problem solving part. Like Lumiere is so almost like willfully optimistic, almost kind of like in denial of how he's feeling, because he's like, we can make it work, we can figure it out, we can problem solve it, which that attitude can ironically like agitate even more the person in the household who is struggling with depression, because you're not really listening to their feelings or validating them, you're just trying to solve them, and that in itself can be very upsetting.
And especially with men, one of the things we can see is that, or with sad people in general, but what we can see is that people can still have positive feelings for them and hopes that they'll get back to who they were, and will do things to help facilitate and pad that process that allow that person to keep up whatever facade they have created. Like Beast in particular has created a ton of things that keep him from confronting his sadness. He tries to operate as the best he can, and like, no one go in the West Wing, let me tear off this picture of my face. He tries to keeps everything covered and dark, tries to keep himself from having to be constantly confronted with the things that he's lost that make him sad, and the staff catering to that to avoid the angry response for him helps to perpetuate the cycle of depression he's created for himself, because he's not confronting it. He's not uncomfortable enough with it yet that he's doing things to change.
Well, yeah, because he feels hopeless. He feels like, who could ever love me? Who could ever love a beast? And so he's feeling, very, what's the point of it all? And so then people trying to change it and make it different is super agitating, because you're both having two different goals, basically, or like you're trying to shove each other's goals down each other's mouths, even though I don't know if I would say the beast has goals, but maybe the goal is to like die alone or die in despair.
I think his goal is to get through each day.
That's true. That's a good point.
I think his goal is to get through each day the best he can. And when he gets so agitated is when he's confronted with like the realities of his failures, which is a big deal for men. And that is when suicide tends to start to factor into the hopelessness factor, because I know we've talked about it a lot on the show, but hopelessness is the most dangerous symptom of depression. And for men in particular, when they start feeling like they're failing their family, not just they're failing themselves, but they're failing others in their life that they're supposed to be supporting, that's when the suicide risk increases dramatically.
And you would think with Beast too, because he doesn't have like kids necessarily, but he is in a very high-ranking leadership position.
Correct.
When this happens, so that's got to be such a big feeling on his shoulders. And also, like, he has a daily reminder in his household that not only did his screw up curse him, it cursed maybe hundreds of dozens to hundreds of people within his household, like staff. And so every time he's walking around that house, he's being confronted by multitudes of people whose lives he ruined.
Correct. Lives he ruined by being a selfish asshole.
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, how could you not be angry and just like spewing that all over the place?
Which is what he is.
Mm-hmm. And then also I think too, and we see that when he's like pacing in the beginning and he's kind of getting shitty with like Cogsworth and Lumiere and stuff, is people in real life, people who aren't cartoon wildebeest characters, like the idea sometimes of hoping for something is so confrontive almost, because the idea of like hoping for something to be better, it just even like opening the door to feeling that hope can be so heartbreaking somehow that is really like you just shut it down before it even starts. Like, I can't stomach being disappointed again. It's kind of the energy. Like, I can't like allow myself to hope and then be disappointed again. Like, that's too confrontive. And so I think that's his energy as well when he's being so resistant to the plan to like make Belle fall in love with him.
I agree. I think that you're dead on there. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so we've talked a lot about the Beast.
We have.
Big, old, angry, sad Beast man.
Mm-hmm.
Living in isolation in his castle.
Yep, and given the shortness of this movie, it's not like we get a lot.
No, we don't get a lot other than the little stained glass intro about what he was like before. I don't know where his parents are and why they don't exist in the castle, or why no one in town remembers that there is a prince, which is what they do. They circle that loophole in the live movie.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they probably realize, like, oops, that was a cut that shouldn't have happened.
Like, why doesn't anyone in town know, like, about the huge castle on the hill and that there was, like, a royal family who lived there that they're no longer being ruled by?
Yeah.
Right, with, like, a 100-foot tower that you just pretty easily seen.
Yeah, it'd be pretty wild if, like, your monarchy just disappeared. And what? Who rules you now? Like, it would be total anarchy.
Right. So we talked about Beast. Let's talk about our villain, Gaston.
Our antagonist. Oh, Gaston. So with Gaston, I know the first thing you thought of.
It's douche. Giant douche.
Yeah, but if we were gonna assess him, what are we thinking?
Douche isn't a diagnosis, so I guess we can't use that.
No matter how much we have advocated for it.
Yeah, doesn't quite work.
Yeah, I tried to get turd sandwich in there too. Just they denied my application for the DSM-6.
Go ahead.
With Gaston, what we see is that Gaston is extremely self-centered. He is very narcissistic. He is very much into himself. He seeks praise obsessively. He needs to be the best. He needs everyone to know he's the best, and he needs to be at the center of attention.
Yeah.
Every time Gaston is present, it is all about Gaston. And it is Gaston telling you about how awesome Gaston is.
I mean, whole songs. He keeps a little dude around him just to talk about how dope he is. Like, I don't even know if he likes LeFou. Go ahead, Hannah.
And also to humiliate him. He doesn't, so he can show his power or dominance if something happens that he doesn't like.
Mm-hmm. So since douche is not a diagnosable mental health syndrome, what are we thinking instead for Gaston?
I think we don't get quite enough information to make one call or another, but I think that starting in the cluster B of personality disorders, which is where we see the more intense and dramatic ones. Well, not intense. It's the more emotionally expressive ones. We see antisocial personality disorder in this cluster. We see narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and borderline. And the two that strike me as the most likely symptoms that I would want to rule out in an assessment for him are narcissistic and antisocial.
And just real quick, so by cluster B, what we mean by that is in the big old DSM, there's like a few sections. One is axis, well, never mind, that's old school DSM. There used to be an axis 1 and axis 2. That's the kind I learned when I was in school.
All the way through 5.
Yeah. But now it's just like there is the segment or the sections that are more like depression, schizophrenia, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, yada, yada. And then there's a second sort of section, which is more like personality disorders. And those are in different groups or clusters, what we call them. So cluster B is just the second grouping of different personality disorders. There's a ton of them. If you want to hear us go into great length about several, listen to our Anchorman episode that we did all the way back in season 1, where we kind of do a back and forth about Ron Burgundy and which personality disorder fits him best.
Or also our live episode on Mean Girls, where we did sort of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So narcissistic personality disorder has a lot of the symptoms or a lot of the criteria that you just brought up, Ben.
It does. The narcissistic personality type, they are prone to seeking the attention of others, but the only attention they want is the attention that is adoration for them. And they are completely focused on their needs. They very rarely consider or see the needs of other people in their circle, and are entirely absorbed with their own greatness. And it's often not really true, but that's the only messaging they hear. That anything else goes into the cognitive dissonance land, where they don't hear it and they ignore it or get angry and angrily refute it. I'm pretty sure we see frequent examples of this in the news every day. But
yeah, and cognitive dissonance is when you like a thought or a fact or something is told to someone that is so directly opposed to what they believe that it's almost like your brain goes staticky. Like your brain's like, nope, I can't accept that information. And it makes you really uncomfortable. We grow from cognitive dissonance if we allow ourselves to.
right.
It's directly challenging what we believe, which is really hard. And like you're saying, for Gaston, well, for someone who might be working with narcissistic personality disorder, the cognitive dissonance happens when they are basically not treated like they are God's gift to whoever.
Correct. And they don't like that. And they reject that and tend to fire people from their presence who don't fit that bill of providing them with that adoration. And we see both LeFou and the triplets of women who and the rest of the town who follow him around and just feed his ego. Like anybody that doesn't feed his ego, like Maurice, for example, he
and
Belle, he tends to have problems with, although he views Belle as a conquest.
Yeah.
He doesn't see Belle as a person. Like,
no.
You can see in the beginning song, the Belle song, that LeFou's trying to say, well, she's kind of like maybe not your type, basically, because she reads books and she thinks thoughts and stuff. And all he can see is, but she's like the hottest chick here, dude. Like, she's the hottest chick, and I'm the hottest dude, and hotness is hotness, baby. And hotness meets hotness. And that's all he can see, which is what you're kind of saying, Ben.
Right. I'm looking in a handy table put together in one of the books that I like a lot is Movies and Mental Illness by Danny Wedding and Ryan Nemechek. You guys can find that. It's a really cool textbook I used in a course I took on psychopathology and film at Eastern Illinois. But the super summary would be that a narcissistic personality disorder comes with grandiosity, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy for the problems and needs of others. So if I were looking at Gaston with a black marker and going check, 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 I just checked all those boxes.
Yeah.
No, for sure. Like even with the way he proposes to Belle, like one, it never occurs to him that she would have any opinion, much less no. Like he waltzes into her. I mean, he sets up the band outside. He waltzes into her house and just starts telling her what her life is going to be, because that's the life that he wants.
Right.
And it doesn't even occur to him that she could say no, that she wouldn't want those things. Like he's just so zeroed in on how she's part of his story. Like she's not a person to him.
Yeah, she's just a piece of the puzzle. He's like, I'm going to have this life. I'm going to have the most beautiful girl, and I'm going to have these kids, and she's going to do whatever I want her to do, and I'm going to continue to be amazing. And everybody has to just do whatever I want, and this is the kind of life I want. So why would she? I think it's interesting that he even asks her.
That's true.
like I feel like you're just like begging, hey, we're getting married today. Is this a dress you want to wear? Like, I think he would just walk in and be like, hey, we're going to get married, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that I think it's odd that he even asks her, even though we know that he would need to, but.
Well, it's definitely more like he's asking her as like a formality.
Yeah.
Like that's like the steps you take to getting married.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, like he doesn't
the
even
proposal, like he has to have the best proposal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even concern himself with like what she would want. And the thing that tips the scales for where it goes into full-blown narcissism for me is that he considers it like a service he's providing to her. Like it's a gift to her.
Oh, yeah.
Like him choosing her is like her wish come true.
Yes, for sure. And so it truly
Absolutely.
blows his, chestnut-sized mind that she would say no. And I think that's where, I think a lot of his action in the movie, like his drive in the rest of the movie, is the cognitive dissonance we were talking about. Like, he can't deal with how uncomfortable it makes that rejection makes him feel, that he then starts to lash out. Then it becomes a thing where if I can't have you, no one can.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to ruin your life until you.
Yes.
In his case, it's I'm going to ruin your life until you make it my way.
Yeah, like I'm going to dominate you.
Well, I'm going to have your father locked up for being crazy unless you get with me, or I'm going to destroy the other person that you're interested in.
Well, and that's too, I don't know if he says this in the Disney one, even though I just watched it, or this is in the live action one that he says it, but once he realizes about the beast, then he starts creating a narrative almost immediately that the beast must be having a spell on her, or the beast must be doing something to her where she won't accept him as his partner. So it's he has to make a whole narrative then to fit his story that he's the best, and why would anyone reject him unless there's these crazy mystical obstacles in the way.
God, this is sounding way too familiar.
Yeah, it does, but I feel like it wasn't in the cartoon version.
It was not.
I think it was in the other. I think it's in the live action one.
That's what I can't remember where it was said.
It was not. In the cartoon, he goes pretty quick to manipulating the crowd into believing that the beast is coming after them. He doesn't say anything about him having a spell on her. He just goes.
I'm totally wrong. Did he say that in live action one?
I don't know. I'm
totally up.
Maybe.
I feel like he looks in the mirror. I'm seeing it in my mind's eye. He looks in the mirror and he's like, he must have her under some sort of spell. That could be a totally other different Disney movie, to be quite honest. But it does make sense that I think in his mind he has to create since he failed his conquest of Belle and therefore took a hit to his identity, then he has to make this big conquest out of the beast and making him into this big monster that we have to go conquer, and how quickly he goes there, because I think he needs a feel good moment. He needs to reassert his manliness.
Right. Mm-hmm. He needs a win, and he needs to reassert himself because he just got proven wrong in front of the entire town. So he just got emasculated.
Yeah.
And guess what? Again, you tie that into men. If you do that to a man in front of a group of other men, you're going to see a reaction.
Yeah,
if you take away his power in front of his crowd, you're going to see a huge reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what we get.
It would be interesting to see what would have happened if that story wasn't immediately followed up with like Belle going to the castle and then living in the castle, like how Gaston would have treated her in the town if it was just like back to the regular routine of her just like being around the town.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how he would have treated her.
I think he would have made it his personal mission to antagonize her for the rest of his life.
Oof, she's got to get out of that town, y'all.
Yeah, she would definitely have to leave.
She would have to leave, or he'd kill her.
Yeah.
He definitely would do something wild like that, or sexually assault her. Not to get too dark while we're talking about Beauty and the Beast, but he definitely would try to dominate her, I think. Like,
Yeah.
Well, that's why people come to our show for the real shit. They don't come to our show for like, let's talk about fairies and wizards and Disney.
But I just feel like sometimes we get to these places when we're analyzing these movies where I'm like, the darkness is descending upon me.
Yeah.
Well, we've all been therapists for a long time now. We know that darkness exists in the world, and like here there be monsters. Like so people use Disney quotes.
Because I think he definitely would sexually assault her. Now that I'm thinking it through, I don't mean to laugh. I just can't believe this is what I'm saying out loud. And that because it's a two-parter thing too, where then it's like revenge on her, but then also he like ruins her for other people.
Yeah.
Say that he had her. I mean, I want to preface that by saying people who are diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder wouldn't necessarily do that. And I don't want it to sound like we're saying that people with personality disorders would do that to other people.
No, Gaston would do that.
We're talking about this guy specifically.
Yes. Absolutely.
So we mentioned a lot about the narcissism, but we also discussed in our pre-show, because that's the term we're going to use for prep time now, is pre-show because we're professional, is
oh shit, okay.
we have a little gold star on our logo now because it says professional. It says pro. But we see some antisocial traits in him too, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, that's also part of the whole, like, you don't really see other people's, like, autonomy, or, like, you don't really see other people maybe as, like, full-fleshed people. So more of, like...
Well, it's a means to an end, right? Yeah. Isn't it where everybody is a means to an end? And he's, clearly is, violent and takes his, he even just pushes LeFou around on a pretty consistent basis, like not really caring, not really being able to see anything outside of himself.
He really likes to hunt and kill animals, but he does it in a way that's more socially acceptable.
Right. He hits LeFou, but he also, like, when they go through the Gaston song, the no one blank like Gaston,
he says
they talk about his fighting prowess, his wrestling prowess, and they're like, well, wrestling, is definitely an ancient sport. Yeah. It's pretty clear that he gets into bar fights.
Well, no, they say, he fights dirty, he bites people. There's a few things at the end of the Gaston song that I can't think off the top of my head that I was registering as, like, red flag. That song is, like, listing all his red flags.
Yeah.
By the end of it.
Pretty much.
So antisocial, in a nutshell, is a disregard for and violation of the rights of others. It is when we say antisocial personality disorder, people hear antisocial and go like, what, does that mean he doesn't like people? Or does it mean he doesn't interact with people? He likes to avoid? Like, no, antisocial means that they do things that are counter to the values of society.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, where you see people like Michael Myers, which we covered pretty well in our Halloween episode from season 1 about what antisocial personality disorder really is. So it's definitely suggests going back and looking at that episode or listening to that one if you haven't. But with him, one of the things we see, like you're talking about, we see him striking LeFou often.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When he's challenged and when something happens, like he goes to this asylum keeper and makes a deal that if Belle doesn't marry him, he should take her father prisoner.
That's some evil ass behavior. Like
that is
truly, like, one-upping to like an extreme like length. Like, I have been upset by this woman, so I'm going to literally destroy her whole family, who is her father.
Unless she submits to me.
Yeah, and so that's definitely more of like on the antisocial persona disorder length, because it's like you're not thinking about or caring about the gravity of your actions, because you're only thinking about like your needs.
So that's 3 check marks right there. Harm to animals, harm to people, disregard for others' needs,
and like in the
violations of their
Gaston
rights.
song, he says no one says no to Gaston, which is a wild thing to say publicly. Mm-hmm. And just, I mean, yeah, it's just like he's truly like an evil dude. Like, the thing with Maurice and locking up Maurice just to get even is such like a truly even, like, tit for tat. But not even that, it's like tit for all the tats.
But it wasn't, or is it a tat for all the tits?
Oh, gosh.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's a children's movie. We've already talked about suicide and sexual assault, so I guess it's just
yeah, we're
This
really.
movie had a lot of cleavage for a children's movie.
I was thinking the same thing when I was watching it. Oh, yeah.
Those triplets, and then when the maid is in her human form and like does her like va-va-voom thing by Lemire and letting him know like basically what's about to happen that night when he gets away from Cogsworth.
No doubt.
But there was a lot of cleavage. But anyway, I think, Brittany, that you're not going quite far enough here. Like, I'm fully in line with you, but I think it goes farther. It wasn't tit for tat. It was to dominate.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like to get even. It was to dominate and manipulate and force her into doing what he wanted. It wasn't just like, well, I'm gonna strike back at you. No, it was much more than that.
Because I think what the Venn diagram, I mean, there's a big kind of Venn diagram with both of these personality disorders that we're talking about. But I think the clear one is, in this case, because it's about the relationship between Belle and Gaston, is he does not care how he acquires her, nor does he care about what that relationship will look like. Like, it doesn't bother him that like she'd only want to be with him because X, Y, and Z. Like, that isn't even like what does that mean? Like, that's neither here nor there.
No, he wants to, breed with the most beautiful woman and the smartest one, and he doesn't care what's smart, the most beautiful woman in town. And he, doesn't view her as a person that has any investment in that decision whatsoever. And then his desire to go and kill the beast without like any consideration for anything other than whatever viewpoint he cooked up in his head, and showing callous disregard for the beast's life. If this were a real person and I was seeing these types of behaviors, wondering if antisocial personality disorder factors into the equation, I think would be a necessary part of any diagnostic process.
Well, yeah, because you want to also make sure that you are thinking. Part of being an effective therapist is you have to always be trying to think through the perspective of your client, so that you are giving them feedback and suggesting goals and things like that are aligned with their worldview. And so that's why diagnosing can be really helpful for us with these kind of things, like Ben just said, because if we had someone in our office with either of these diagnoses, like, we couldn't try to like, if we brought up like, well, don't you mind like how she feels, you know what I mean? Like, if we tried to like come at them from like more of a like try to reach their empathy or compassion, like, we would be missing the mark, and it would just start it just wouldn't be effective, I guess is what I'm saying.
I guess, and maybe what would just kind of be helpful in general is kind of just saying that the relationship that a person who has a personality disorder, that the relationship that they have with their therapist is a part of their treatment. And sometimes we have to adjust what that relationship looks like. Still ethical and still has good boundaries, but that there are sometimes when you have people who have personality disorders, in order to manage a power dynamic so that it's safe for both of you, sometimes the relationship just looks a little bit different. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Clinically, I mean.
Yeah. So I think that covers Gaston pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have anything else they want to say about him other than that we're not too sad when he fell?
Yeah, he's the worst.
Yeah, he is the worst. Agreed.
Like
He would be a horrible husband.
like he might be the most detestable Disney villain I've encountered.
Huh.
Besides Scar.
Scar's pretty bad. Yeah, Scar's pretty awful. There's no doubt about that. Yeah,
I don't know enough off the top of my head, to be quite honest.
Scar's like slinky, though, and sneaky.
Yeah, I am wearing Maleficent earrings right now, but no one can see it but Ben, who can see me on the camera.
Woo!
All right. So
I haven't put an earring in my ear in a long time.
Oh, I bet you look so cool when you had one, though.
Would.
Yeah, you two. I don't think you two have ever seen me with it. My ear is pierced.
No.
Yeah. I remember you telling. I feel like I remember you telling us that.
So the third thing, which is more like a fun, I don't know, a lighter topic, I guess, is the topic of Stockholm Syndrome, which is actually not a mental health diagnosis. It's not in the DSM. It's not a formal psychiatric diagnosis. It's more of, I don't know what we would call that, like a pop, more of like a pop psychology theory. Is that what you would call it then?
No, I wouldn't go that far as calling it pop psychology, because it's been validated, but it's just it's not an accepted diagnosis. It's like a phenomenon.
Yeah, well, that's a better way of putting it. It's a phenomenon, but it's not like a formal diagnosis. And so
yeah, because
go ahead.
Sorry, just really quick. Yeah, because I think essentially what it is a trauma reaction. So I don't know that it would be actually a diagnosis.
And it's a survival response, honestly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
Like if you like, so do either one of you want to explain what Stockholm is? People may not know.
Do you want to go, Hannah?
Jesus. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, let me see if I mean, essentially Stockholm Syndrome, Jesus, is when you feel attachment to the person who is, who kidnapped you or who is, I mean, that's exactly what it is, right?
Yep.
Yes, you're emotionally connected. You feel emotionally bonded to the kidnapper or person who is holding you hostage or whatever in some way that makes you, would make sense as a survival reaction, because I think it helps people create a narrative where then they can have emotional attachment to this person in order for them to get out of the situation, or in order to create a narrative in which they can deal with what's happening to them.
Or I think create a narrative where you're not in, quote unquote, in danger. Like if you can convince yourself that your captor is good, or that they care about you, or that you have a relationship, then, I'm sure it feels a lot less likely that something bad would happen to you, because you've humanized them in your mind.
Yes. Yes, it's all those things. And just like flash update, folks, if someone breaks into your house when you're home, it's not to steal your stuff.
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
Like, so you be careful about bonding with folks, because when people break into your home, it's not when you're home, it's bad news.
Well, yeah.
I don't really know if that was necessary, but thanks for saying it.
We're not saying, guys.
Like just understanding like why that exists is because it helps create a narrative of hope that you can give. It also helps to try to make that relationship go both ways, so that they regain some kind of control by getting the affection of one of the captors, who then might advocate for them and not hurt them.
Yeah, so this is what it says when you look it up on Google. This is what it says. Stockholm Syndrome is a condition in which hostages develop a psychological alliance with their captors during captivity. Emotional bonds may be formed between captor and captives during intimate time together, but these are generally considered irrational in light of the danger or risk endured by the victims.
So I guess the clincher is how irrational is Belle's attachment or endearment towards the beast. That seems to me, in hearing you say that, Hannah, that seems to me to be like the make it or break it about whether it's occurring or not. Like if someone's, like the example that actually like Stockholm Syndrome is named after is these people were during a bank robbery. These guys robbed a bank, held a bunch of people hostage. By the end of it, like they were like kissing the bank robbers, like the women who were being like, they were like, no, they're really good. Like one of them had a relationship with one of the bank robbers after the fact, even though they were holding them hostage at gunpoint, like putting them in a very dangerous situation. So their bonding with them is in direct opposition to the actions that are being demonstrated by the captors. Mm-hmm. And so I guess with where it feels maybe different now that I'm like thinking about it out loud with Belle and the Beast is that, I mean, he's threatening her in the beginning. He's obviously a gigantic, monstrous looking thing. Like his body is threatening. But he treats her like a person. I don't know. Like, I guess.
Like you don't feel like he treats her bad enough for it to not make it, like for her reaction to not make any sense at all. Like it's not like he's like keeping her in that tower and like not feeding her and being horrible to her. Like he's kind of actually being sort of nice, which doesn't make any fucking sense. And
just treating her like a free person in his home.
Yeah, even though she totally is stuck there because has her hostage.
Yeah.
That's punishment for the infraction of just knocking on his door.
Yeah,
and like being inside of his house. I mean, it's definitely okay. If we're to believe that the movie takes place over several days, that makes me feel like it might be Stockholm Syndrome, because that is the turnaround in how she perceives him is irrational.
Absolutely.
But if it's like a longer period of time, maybe not. What do you think?
I mean, I just think that she is like, if we took this out of the context of being a Disney princess movie in which anyone can fall in love in a matter of, I don't know, 2 seconds, even if they're kidnapping you and also kidnapped your dad and was horrible. So I feel like just that in and of itself, like it's pretty irrational in general that she would have any kind of feelings for him, I think, in real life. So I feel like it's hard to know because 5 days just doesn't, that part of it just doesn't make any sense. If we're to believe it's 5 days, it's like, then most of the reactions that they're both having don't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. And I guess would he be doing Stockholm Syndrome-ish technique by like giving her a library, like, because that's also what people who effectively captors who, from what I understand, captors who effectively do that with their captees or captives will like spin a narrative, obviously, about it too. Because like in that specific situation where this comes from, that Stockholm bank robbery, they convinced like the captives that like the police were bad, the police wanted to hurt them. You know what I mean? Like it was kind of a very brainwashy thing. Yeah. And so with her, like by giving her a library, by giving her wardrobe, by giving her a room in the castle, this luxury, it's sort of like creating a counter narrative that she's not captive, even though she very much is. Mm-hmm. Like giving her a false sense of like autonomy within her kidnapped state. Which is like, I would assume would be a pretty dope Stockholm Syndrome technique.
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like it's so weird. I feel like it's so weird to talk about this because I feel like it's. I just don't know. I just don't know if it fits because I feel like what it really is Disney giving us a story that's just unrealistic and outrageous, and that's really just what we're seeing. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I feel like if we took a real person and this was, but also how could this even be a thing? He's a fucking beast. So I don't know, man. Like, I kind of just feel like I don't know how to.
No, you're right. I mean, here's the thing: you start poking any fairy tale. Like, you can only poke a fairy tale so much because it's a fucking fairy tale. Like, it's a fantasy. Like, he's a literal beast person. And, like, she's just, like, into it because he's got, like, not even a great personality.
Well, I feel like she's and maybe part of what makes it so that they're into each other is that she feels like an outsider in the town, right? So like she feels like an outsider, he feels like an outsider, like he's not connected in the same ways. And also he maybe is the only man like person, I don't even know how to talk about it. He's who actually
male approximate.
Yes, who notices that she's smart and who likes that she likes to read, and that nobody else in her life besides her dad, who I feel like is kind of maybe so busy doing his own thing that he might not really be able to give her that either. Like the only other person,
positive attention.
Yeah, for things that she doesn't get, and also feeling included and maybe feeling like someone.
Yeah, because obviously, as demonstrated by the intro song of the movie, she doesn't really have any friends. I don't know, maybe the shopkeeper, the bookkeeper, but like she is very much apart from the whole village, and like no one really understands her. I mean, that's the whole theme of that song. And so yeah, maybe going to the castle and being amongst a bunch of quote unquote people, inanimate objects, cursed beings, that embrace her and that want to please her and that want to be kind to her and give her a lot of positive attention, even though it's with an agenda. Like, well, it's kind of a lot of warm people.
Well, and it makes me think of the Island of Misfit Toys, right? Like, so it's like when everybody has the collective experience that everybody has of all feeling different than the rest of the world. I mean, it would make sense that she would feel comfort there just in general. So maybe that's more of what this has to do with, and why that part of her is able to kind of open up to the idea of maybe, even though he's a beast, like maybe he's really nice. I don't know. That sounds crazy.
Like I said, like part of it is like, this is a Disney fairy tale. So there's only so much reality that's within it. But it is a wild premise when you really think about it, of like, she basically is held captive, granted in a castle by a beast, and in exchange for her father's life. I mean, like, that's pretty fucking intense. And she's cut off. I mean, it's very cult-like in a way, actually. She's cut off from everyone she knows. She's kind of treated like she's adored, given everything she thinks she needs. Like, it is like she's being indoctrinated into a cult a little bit.
Which is interesting enough what we just did a live episode on Instagram.
Oh, true, about Midsummer.
But like some of the things you guys are saying are like they definitely provide arguments for Stockholm, but I think there's arguments against it too.
Oh, for sure.
Because some of the things that we see are like Beast does change.
He does change. He meets her. I would argue he goes farther towards her than she goes towards him, which I think is different. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's not acclimating. He's more acclimating to be more of like a human man that she might want than she's acclimating to being some version of herself that he wants.
Right.
Which I would postulate, I would just theorize that in Stockholm Syndrome it's probably the other way around.
Right. And she doesn't show any anger towards the townspeople for wanting to attack bees, or for like wanting to help her. She shows compassion for Beast and going like, no, he's not a monster.
Yeah, because she's gotten to know him.
Because she's gotten to know him, but that's not irrational because it's true.
Sure, he's never really hurt her. I mean, he did imprison her. But, and also, I guess the thing is, too, is, like, as soon as he gives her, like, the ability to leave, she leaves. So she does still have, like, free will. Like, she's still exercising her free will and her freedom of thought.
And she continues to do so the whole time. She never acclimates to his narrative. He has to bend to hers.
Yeah. So I think that's true. I think if it was more like Stockholm Syndrome or like cult sort of stuff, when he said you can go to your father, she'd be like, no, I'll stay. I think it'd be a lot harder for her to leave. And she goes almost immediately when she's given the chance to see him.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if we have a final say about Stockholm Syndrome. More no, I think, than yes.
I think mostly no. I think that it's worth the discussion, but I think it's mostly no because we don't see her attitude change. She stays consistent the whole time.
That's a good point, yeah.
I think that's a good point, too, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were saying, like, he bends more to her than her to him.
She doesn't adopt anything that seems irrational. He does start making efforts almost immediately, like realizing he's being an asshole and starts acting apologetically and taking care of her. And he doesn't mention to her that she's a captive. He doesn't keep her in a power situation. Like, he doesn't remind her that she's here forever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's never, I don't remember that being said in the movie outside of the beginning. And then, you know, like when she asks to see her father, it's like she's accepted that's the deal she made to free her father. Like, she willingly entered this agreement to get her father out. Not that she was taken captive. He took Maurice captive, not her.
Right.
True.
She made that deal herself.
True. And I would imagine, too, I wonder, like, once the final petal fell, if he would just be like, you can go. Like, I don't, there's no reason to keep you around. Because now we're stuck like this. Because I think also the big pull of it is that she's a girl. And that maybe she could break the curse.
I think, that's the underlying whole fairy tale narrative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, is there anything more I want to say about that before we move to treatment?
No.
Okay. So, to be quite frank, I have not thought about this part of it before right now. So I don't know who I would treat. So does anyone have an idea of who they'd want to treat and in what context they'd want to treat them?
I think that Beast is going to need trauma treatment.
For sure.
He's going to need, because like we've probably resolved his depression in the immediate, but the guilt of taking away 10 years of life from all of his staff is going to persist. The fact that he got turned into a beast that is going to be there, like that something happened to him outside of his control, that he was responsible for it, and he was acting that way, is going to be a negative thought that persists. So I think trauma treatment for him is going to be paramount to he and Belle having a successful relationship later, because I think that the likelihood that he has flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, and intensive guilt are high.
Yeah, and I would wonder, too, if he would still have reverberations of his anger, like when he was the beast, kind of like, in his, if he's having a harder moment, like, is he still inclined to, like, snap, and to, like, say things he regrets, to raise his voice, that kind of thing. So I'm sure that was a habit he had for so long. I'm
sure the likelihood of that is yes, because, like, the personalities basically develop by the time we're 2 or 3, and they don't change a whole lot. People's behaviors can change, their motivations can change, but like the core personality traits don't change. So for him to have that ability to have flashpoint anger built into him, that's a personality trait. So he probably still has it. It might not be getting rubbed as raw all the time, so it might not be as present, like with depression agitating and elevating that factor. But I think that you're right, that we'd probably see he has a tendency towards that kind of behavior, and that would probably resurface at some point. Maybe not as aggressively, but like that flash
Sure.
anger would probably be there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think he would absolutely need trauma treatment. I don't know that there'd be any way around it.
It's almost like you'd need to like do a trauma triage of like the whole castle.
Yeah.
Like all the stuff.
Well, and also that other sense of like his identity, and like he would still have to work on that, and also maybe leaning really hard into the relationship for that to make him feel happy, and trying to find other ways for him to actually be happy, because I think, as we know in Disney movies, that Disney and everything, relationships solve all your problems. So I do also think that helping him find ways to accept himself and love himself, I think will be really important, because I feel like in order for their relationship to work, he would have to find ways to make for him to find his own happiness.
Yeah, I think they would be very at risk of maybe him being codependent with her.
Yeah.
I think she's a very independent person. And so I could see him being very much like, you saved me, you made me a better man, a better person, like maybe giving her too much. And because she's so independent, I could see her maybe rearing back from that a bit.
Yeah.
And that causing some conflict.
Well, and like, what kind of pedestal would she have to be on? I mean, my God, she saved his world essentially, and their lives. So, I mean, I think it would be really hard. I think they would definitely need couples work, but I don't think we could do couples work until after he got some trauma treatment, because I just don't think it would be. I don't think it would be as effective, and I would be worried that he would need to learn how to manage his trauma and his behavior.
Yeah.
As well as his triggers before I get him in a room and start talking about his relationship with her. I think that would just be, because I feel like that would pull his identity in two different places, and I just don't know that he could emotionally. I don't think that anybody could emotionally deal with that in that setting. So
I don't think so. And like to piggyback on that and tie it back into men's mental health.
Yeah.
Is when we look at him, like, you're going to see all this responsibility that has been, his all along, but to see him have to blend dealing with the pressure of everyone else in the world looking at him and going, you have the most beautiful woman, you have the biggest castle, you have everything you could ever possibly need, and you got rescued from being trapped in the body of a beast. What's wrong? Where's the problem? Smile.
Right.
Yeah.
And
like being like written off, dismissed.
And, well, it being like, how could you possibly be sad? Like, like Robin Williams, someone like that, like, you got everything. What do you mean? How are you sad?
And that, ironically, when people say things like that, it adds to the depression, because you already think there's something wrong with you individually, like something's wrong, like your self-worth. And so people beat themselves up about being depressed, guys. You don't need to beat anybody up about being depressed. You don't have to try to like give them a pep talk or like make them feel like wackier than they already are. Because like people, like myself included, like when I'm in a depressed state, like I even in my own head will be like, what are you so sad about? You have this, and this. So people already do that to themselves. You don't need to do that to them, guys. They're already taking care of it. And that's not helping them feel better either.
Yeah, having, I have clinical depression. And so just that idea, all the shoulds, there's so many shoulds, and there's so many, and also we're so good at beating ourselves up, finding things that don't even really make any sense or don't actually have an effect on, but it just makes it feel harder, makes it feel like, again, we're not living up to people's expectations, and we're a burden, and we're a bummer to be around. Like, there's so many different things that go along with having depression that I feel like people don't, whether they're just not aware, or because our mental health education is so poor and lacking, that people just aren't aware of what it's like. Like, I think it's definitely a part of that. But I think it's also a part of, when you're depressed, it's also, and it's internalized anger, right? I mean, like, that's what that's what we talk about sometimes, that's kind of what happens. And so when you're just angry at yourself, nobody else hears all the awful things you're saying to yourself.
Well, I think it's just the thing where we want to, as a society, feel like we have control, and because it's scary to not have control. And so the idea that someone around you could be sad, even though they have quote unquote everything, I think is too scary of an idea. And so we try to rationalize it to make ourselves feel better. I mean, that's why, like, when I talk to people who have depression in their lives, they always want to know what the trigger is. Like, like what's wrong, like what's starting. And I go, sometimes it's you wake up and your brain's not firing quite correctly and you're just sad. And that's the long and the short of it. Like, that can be a very helpless concept, though. It can feel very helpless, that idea. And scary, because it's just, there's no control over that. But there is control, obviously. You learn skills, you get a support system, like you can manage your symptoms. But I think the idea that something can just happen to you for no reason, kind of, is just too scary. Right. And so we want to try to rationalize it. So, and it's also that thing where when someone gets probably victim blame is because then if we can blame the victim because of the circumstances, then what we're doing is we're inverse rationalizing to ourselves about why that won't happen to us. It's to protect us. Like, well, it must have been because of that, and that, and I don't do those things, so that can't happen to me. It's all like we're trying to protect ourselves too, like of scary ideas. The idea that things can just happen to us that we can't control. Anyway. But I would also think too, going back to the treatment part of it, Hannah, with like family therapy, I wonder would they need to do family therapy maybe with Maurice as well? Like, I can't imagine he's going to love this relationship.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking like we'd probably need to have like a family, like do family therapy where the beast, what is it? Just Adam. Okay. Oh, fine. His name is Adam. So,
call Prince Adam.
I don't. She's just whatever. Right? He doesn't need a name. So but like him and Maurice would need to repair and talk about their relationship, because I do think very much that it would be really hard for the dad to give his blessing, and that makes me feel like there's maybe even like a pretty rare chance that they would be together, because I feel like Belle would really be influenced by her dad for a good reason, because it's only been the two of them for such a long time. So I feel like it would be something that could really impact the rest of their relationship, and I think that would be something that I could see them for. And I think that it would be, and again, it'd be in a similar situation of Adam would have to get treatment, and he would have to get treatment before that, because again, in order for him to learn how to be vulnerable and talk about his feelings without feeling triggered, or without learning different coping skills for himself, it would be almost probably impossible to create a healing environment, because I feel like he would feel very much attacked, especially in the room with two people that he wants something from.
Someone who he very blatantly did something bad to that hasn't him.
Yeah.
Like, that would be very triggering.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
And I'm sure like Maurice is traumatized in his own right, obviously.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think though that given the way we see, we don't see a whole lot of Maurice. He's not a very deep character, but based on what I see out of him, I think that Maurice is forgiving and probably pretty well adapted and adjusted, and I think that he would be able to get through that conversation with Beast if they had it.
I think so too. Like I don't think it would be us waiting for Maurice to make a decision about how he felt. I think it would be waiting for the Beast to be able to accept Maurice's forgiveness, because I don't know if he would feel like he would deserve it based on everything that happened.
And that sound we hear is Hannah hitting the nail right on the head with the hammer. Ding, ding, ding.
But I mean, like, I don't want to start a whole thing, but I do wonder though. I mean, like, it'd be like a guy kidnaps you for no reason really. Then he basically kidnaps your daughter in exchange for you. You almost die trying to save her. You almost get taken. I feel like, and then it's like your daughter's like, we fell in love. I think might take a while for you to come around on that. Even if he is a he's a transformed person. I think it would just take, I think he could forgive, but I think he'd be really skittish and for like a while.
Probably. He seems like a kind of anxious fellow in general. And I think that with therapy provided by someone skilled would be able to navigate them through. And I think that conversation would go well. And there's plenty of incentives for Maurice to have that conversation, like his daughter marrying a prince who seems to adore her now and has shown serious efforts to not be the aggressive ass bag he was, which is in the DSM, by the way. But and also, he could have the resources of a prince to work on his inventions and probably have actual space to work on them instead of the basement of their little cottage. So I think there's substantial gain that he would be probably willing to have that conversation as long as good faith was continued to be showed.
True. And I think we've covered it pretty much. The only thing I can think of as like a child therapist is, I'm assuming Chip has been frozen in time the whole time he's been in the castle.
I think he always has been for some reason.
Like 6, I assume.
Yeah.
So I would say, he might need some help acclimating back to. He said he was a teacup. He was a teacup during his formative years, and so he might need like getting back into society. Like a little like boy or something. Like he might be a little feral. I mean, his mom seems like she raised him with some manners, even as a teapot and a teacup. But I wonder how he will do with I don't know how many other kids, if there were any, in the castle. So I think he might need some therapeutic help, acclimating back to his peers.
So he had siblings. They just were only shown for one scene, but there were other cups in the cabinet that were other children. So
I think it would be interesting. This is so weird. I think it would be. This is what this podcast is all about.
It is.
I think it would be interesting to see how he is as a human boy, and if he needs therapy, acclimating to being a human boy. And if he misses being a teacup, he might.
Yeah.
And if he just wants to be a real boy.
Yeah. And then if he knows how to hang out with other kids his age, if he struggles to fit in, he might need some social skills help.
Yeah. I think that would make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's a good place to kind of tie a little bow on this episode here and kind of hit the, did they live happily ever after?
Sure.
Possibly.
I think so.
I mean,
I didn't watch
I'm just going to say
video
no.
sequels.
I'm going to say no, but I guess.
Hannah.
Okay, Slytherin.
Of course Hannah would say no. So final thoughts. I mean, this is my all-time favorite Disney movie. This is the Disney princess that I am most connected to. This is one of my favorite things. I had this on VHS as a kid. I was the exact age to fall in love with this movie. So that is my final thoughts. This movie is the best.
That feels so crazy. But I get it. But I know. So I really love this movie. I think I actually know all of the dialogue somehow. I certainly know the words to all the songs. So, I mean, it's one of my favorite movies. I'm sure I'll watch it a lot more. I really, really love the live version, though, in a lot of different ways. Yeah, it's really beautiful. So I'll definitely watch this movie again. It was interesting to do this one. I think definitely the hardest one for me in terms of trying to wrap my brain around how I could talk about it by far, which is why I might have been a little bit more quiet. Because it was just hard for me to think about. And also that, sometimes talking about depression is just harder sometimes for me than others. So I think that might have just been part of what was going on. But yeah, I love this movie and I'm sure I'll watch it a billion more times.
Wow, Color, that the first time you've ever said that, I think. So,
well, it was a sing-along. I sang along to all the songs.
She did. I was next to her.
Yeah.
You know what was going to happen is that we're going to get asked to do popcorn psychology karaoke sing along with Disney songs now, because you said that.
No one. That is on you.
I just created that.
That is on Ben.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put that on our Patreon, guys.
I did not give my consent.
I also do not give my consent.
I'm not going to be Gaston by you.
So as far as final thoughts, I think that this movie is it's a timeless story, and I like every version of it I've ever seen. The live version, plays that I've seen live. I think it's an interesting story that puts a different kind of spin on you can help there, or someone can find a path to be a better person that doesn't have to rely on, like, if you just love them enough, they'll stop being an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
Because this one shows the beast wanting to change for multiple reasons, not just, oh, there's a really pretty girl and I should stop being a dick.
Sure.
I think that there's more to his story than that. And
also, like, the drive to be a better person didn't come from her. It came from, like, his buddies.
Right. It came from, and that the support of everyone else saying, like, hey man, like, we need to work together here to get everyone back on track, but also, like, we love you and care about you. And it was really like the support of his support network more than her, and like her coming into the picture is a little bit more of a motivation, but that's more realistic than a lot of the fairy tale stuff where you see, like, well, she just loved him enough and he stopped being an asshole. And that drives me bananas. But this is not that. And I remember, like, it's weird. Like, I have that's like burned into my brain. Like when Gaston is like climbing up the ramparts, that particular scene is burned into my brain because my dad was in the Navy and used to go to Korea for 2 weeks for his training. He was in the reserve, and he came home right at that scene one point in time. So like that scene, despite being like a big, like, scary moment, is like frozen in my brain because, like, Dad came home after being gone for 2 weeks from Korea, and we got to see our dad again after 2 weeks, and he brought us cool presents from Korea. So
that's very sweet, Benjamin.
It's like burned into my head that way. So there's a little anecdote, but I like this movie. I like most Disney movies. I think it's a good one, and I think that it will continue to stand the test of time as a classic story that will be told over and over.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Tale as old as time. Mm-hmm. So with that being said,
song as old as rhyme, just like hashtag popcorn psych karaoke.
Anyway, I'm regretting that. So as per usual, as we typically say at the end of these, you can always find us at any social media. We are at Facebook and Instagram at Popcorn Psychology. We're on Twitter at popcorn_psych. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. We're always taking recommendations.
This was a recommendation, so thank you all for that.
That's also true. And also it felt very, like we said, apropos in this time of quarantine. And like Ben was saying at the onset, like, we very much are grateful for all your reviews. We read them. We send Snapchats of them, like screenshots of them, to each other. It's the best way for other people to find us, and we're really grateful for that engagement from you guys who listen to us. So thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.